Hello, everybody, and welcome to Milton Keynes Literary Festival. I'm Flora Rees from the organising committee, and it's fantastic to see so many of you here today for our Saturday of events. Before I start, I want to say a big thank you to Milton Keynes City Council, to the Centre MK, to our lovely hosts here, Community Learning and MK Libraries, who we adore, to Waterstones, who are our bookselling partner, and to Arts Gateway, which is our parent organisation, to all of whom we're extremely grateful, and even more so to our volunteers, our tech team, and everyone who actually makes the LitFest happen. Ruth, David, and Zoe are going to speak for about 45 minutes. There'll be then time for your questions, and anyone at home who wants to ask a question, pop it in the chat, and I'll be able to ask that on your behalf. We'll then have book signing in our lovely bookshop in the lobby, and David and Ruth will be able to sign your books and have a chat. So that's all from me, and I'd now like to welcome to the festival stage Ruth Mancini, David Wilson, and Zoe Walkington. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Zoe. I work as a professor in psychology at the Open University, and it's a real privilege to be asked to host this conversation today. For about 20 years, I trained detectives how to interview people suspected of serious crimes, so serial sexual offences, murder and terrorism. And more recently, I've become interested in the effects that books have on us psychologically. So once we've read the book, what are the psychological things that are happening to us? But also, once we've closed the book and we go out into the real world, what are the lasting impacts of what we've read? So this conversation couldn't be more up my street because we've got two fantastic authors here today. I'm going to start with Ruth. So Ruth Mancini. She got into law at around age 30, became very interested in miscarriages of justice. And a miscarriage of justice is at the centre of her new book, The Stranger on the Stairs, which I was one of the first people to read. It's absolutely fantastic, very gripping. I got through it in 2 days, which is a record for me, a personal best. And she's obviously a best-selling author and a solicitor as well. We've also got David Wilson, Professor David Wilson, who is one of the UK's leading criminologists. He might well be a familiar face to you because he's regularly on our screens and previously a prison governor, so absolutely knows his onions in terms of the criminal mind. So if we could give a big round of applause to our authors. Okay, so I'm going to open up by asking you about the title to this talk, actually. So the title to this talk is Inside the Criminal Mind. And my first question for you is, do you think there is such a thing as a criminal mind? Or do you think any of us could potentially cross that moral line into committing the sort of serious crimes that you as authors write about? And if we could start with you, Ruth. Nice try.
I was going to say we should start with David because he is the academic, the criminologist who actually knows the real answers to this. I can tell you from my 25 odd years representing people who've been accused of crimes what I think is the answer to that, and then David will be telling me the right answer. But I think on a human level and from my experiences, I would say the answer to that is that I think most people, if not all of us, could potentially, in the wrong set of circumstances, cross over into committing a crime, especially if you drive a car, of course, in which case your crime might not be one of what we call strict liability, whereby you may be not have intended those consequences to happen, but you are guilty nonetheless of the crime. And I've looked at this issue really in probably all of my books because having represented people at Milton Keynes Magistrate Court, actually, many times I've driven this way. I was very surprised to find that the library was actually just a stone's throw away. So I feel like I'm back home again, actually, on my home ground. And of course, the police station I've spent much time in as well. I would say that I think in the wrong set of circumstances, any of us can cross over into that criminal territory. We're not going to become serial killers, and I don't know you all, but I could probably take a very educated guess and say probably nobody in this room is going to become a serial killer. But actually, I could be wrong. I might have to watch myself on the way back to the car park. Someone might now be intent at proving me wrong. But as David will probably agree, in fact, with me, most murders aren't actually caused by serial killers. Most murders are GBH's gone wrong, assaults gone wrong, and they come from, in my experience, and David's nodding thankfully, from heightened emotions, and I see this all the time in the cases that I work with. People are human, they are emotional, and we'd like to think that if our partner went off with somebody else, or a son or daughter, something terrible happened to them, that we wouldn't take vengeance, we wouldn't take the law into our own hands. But people do, and they do it usually in the moment of passion. I find that unless you're perhaps talking about cybercrime or financial crime, most crimes that I've dealt with over the years have been things that happen in moments of passion. And that's what interests me the most, really, as a writer. And that's what I like to write about, real people like you and I, who have, gone wrong somewhere because of events in our lives. And it's a very grey area between right and wrong, I find. And I think that hopefully we're all lucky enough in this room to be able to control our tempers and to have a standard of living that doesn't make us resort to doing things that are not lawful. But I do think that we all have it in us. What do you think, David?
Well, firstly, hello. It's very nice to see you all here. Zoe, thank you for the introduction. Ruth, it's very nice to meet you. A number of things flow even from the question and what Zoe has just said. Off the top of my head, I think the current figure is that 1 in 3 adult men in the United Kingdom will have a criminal record. So there are going to be a number of people sitting in this audience who already have a criminal record. If I was to give a more academic answer to the question that Zoe asked, I would say that crime is not a thing. It's a concept that's applicable at certain times in certain societies by those who have the power to apply that concept. And therefore, you can apply the label to behaviors which are currently legal, and behaviors which are currently an offense, you can take that label away. And what we call a crime in this country, or what we say is legal in this country, might not be legal or innocent, legal or a crime in another country. And you just have to think about issues related to men who are gay or bisexual. And today, that used to be a crime until 1967. It's no longer a crime, thank heavens, but it's still a crime in many societies. So could we all commit a crime? Well, it depends if we have we live in a culture at a time when society doesn't wish to apply that label to behavior, and we are constantly inventing new crimes and abolishing old crimes. I think some of the things that Ruth has mentioned, which again would be relevant to an informed audience, is whether you're a man or a woman, you're more likely to be murdered in your home than in an outdoor public space like a street or a park, or an indoor public space like a nightclub or a pub, whether you are a man or a woman. The site of murder in the United Kingdom is a domestic center. Again, most people don't really appreciate, partly because of the way drama in this country uses crime, but 90% of homicides are cleared up. 90%. 9 out of 10 homicides get cleared up by the police. And that's not because the police, forgive me if you are working as police officers or have worked as police officers, that's not because police officers are particularly gifted. It's not because of forensic science. It's not because of the media. It's from the simple reality that the victim and the perpetrator are usually in some form of relationship. That's why murder gets cleared up. And again, I've just been on tour in Scotland, and I deliberately wanted to go on tour in Scotland because of the initiatives that were taken in Glasgow and then in Scotland as a whole, which has meant that the murder rate, the homicide rate, is at its lowest level since the 1970s. There were only 45 homicides for the last year for which we have statistics in Scotland. Every single one of those was cleared up, and none of those homicides were committed by somebody that would be labeled as a serial killer. And all of those homicides were cleared up because, frankly, most homicides are self-solvers. Often the person reporting the crime is the person who committed the crime.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you very much. As authors, you're obviously, from what you've said, kind of navigating between someone's disposition, someone's character, and the situation that they find themselves in. You've both alluded to that. And obviously, David, in your book, A History of Modern Britain in 20 Murders, which has this amazing front cover, beautiful book, you are talking about how particular murders kind of were almost like a signature of a particular era and particular history. I'm interested, how did you pick the murders that you wanted to go with?
Yeah, thank you. The idea behind the book was to I picked murders for a number of different reasons. So to be perfectly honest, sometimes people like to read about murders that they've heard about. And if you want to sell books, you better have something in the book that people go, what's he going to say about Jack the Ripper? So, so let's not pretend that, it's all done from a very, yes. It's a very kind of, it's not a mysterious process. There are various processes ongoing. But I did want to look at crimes that held a story that was bigger than the murder itself, held the story of Britain. And the key thing for me in terms of the title was it was about Britain. I wanted to see how murder got used by government, by the media, to tell that story of Britain. And in particular, I wanted to show that Britain and the British have always wanted to, as it were, outsource the cause of those murders to some group that was othered. So initially it was Irish Catholics who were called hooligans initially, in the 1880s and 1890s. So I used Jack the Ripper in one sense to talk about how this was a time when we othered Irish immigrants into Britain and said they're the problem. Then it became the Italians. Then it became the Maltese. Then it became currently, it became Albanians and Eastern Europeans. We always see our problem in relation to murder as being caused by something that comes into Britain, whereas in fact, the causes of murder in the way that I've described to you are because of who we are, not because of who they are. And the book tries to open up that territory by using some of those stories that I could come across. I also had to be clear. I deliberately chose 2 stories that was about murders in Aberdeen because because of filming, I became so entranced by the city of Aberdeen. I don't know if you've ever been to Aberdeen. And Aberdeen has this amazing boulevard called Union Street. And I kind of felt, if this was anywhere else in Northern Europe, people would be singing its praises. And why have we never heard of Union Street in Aberdeen? So it was really just an excuse to write about Aberdeen in one sense as well. Does that make you feel as if, oh, he's not really serious? But I tried to choose stories that allowed me to kind of also engage my passions.
Okay, thank you very much. Ruth, when you're writing fiction, do you think that enables you to kind of navigate the situation and the disposition of a person differently to someone like David, who's writing factually about an actual murder that happened in an actual case? When you're working with fiction, how does that work for you?
I tend to write to the best of my ability as factually correctly as possible. It frustrates my publisher, who's in the audience sometimes. And it's like, it doesn't all have to be accurate. She's just sitting there. But because I'm a criminal defence lawyer and I went to court for many years and then came home and watched programmes on telly where there was so many inaccuracies in the programmes I was watching, both in dramas, well, mainly in dramas, but occasionally in a true crime programme where somebody would say something that's not accurate. But yes, mostly in dramas, I would be sitting there throwing things at the telly, and so do most of my colleagues. We all say the same thing: "Oh, you don't watch it; it will just make you mad." It really used to make me mad that they couldn't just do that little bit of research and get the story right and to show what things were really like. And I feel that's really important. I've probably gone slightly off of topic of what you were asking, but it does feed back to what David was saying about the way people other crime and make it about what other people do. And it's not something we would do, it's something other people do, which of course has been highly encouraged over the last couple of decades by certain media personalities, shall we say, who own newspapers. But it's important to me to show, A, the job that I do and why criminal defence lawyers are important, why we're needed to test the evidence so that the police can't go around. And again, apologies if there are any police officers in the audience. Most of the police officers I've worked with have been absolutely wonderful. I'm not anti-police, but as we all know, there have been cases of sloppy policing which have led to people being locked up for things they haven't done. And I feel quite passionate about showing what the truth of the situation is, and that we're all human there. But for the grace of God, go all of us. If we were put onto an estate whereby dragged up by parents who were addicts and had no money and got into bad relationships as a result, we might behave the way these others do. We very probably would do. And also, one crime committed by somebody who had no intention of committing. I'm coming back to, when you drive a car, you are very much at risk of committing a crime every time you get into it. I wanted to show that this is what it's really like, and this is what people are like, and they're not other people, they're all of us. We're part of one system, one society, and if things go wrong, we're all responsible for trying to put them right and make society work the way we believe it should. And I feel quite passionate about making that come across in my books. So no, I don't use a huge amount of artistic license in answer to your question finally, Zoe. I try to write real people I've met, people I know, people I've represented in courts and police stations, and people I met today will probably end up in a book too. I very much draw on my real life experiences, and that's what I want to continue to do.
And your question is, I think, a really apt question, because how much truth is there in true crime? And I've just been on tour with one of my friends who's called Martin Frizzell. And Martin Frizzell's wife is Fiona Phillips, who has early onset dementia. And the one thing that sticks in Martin's craw is the salt path. because there was a book sold as the truth, and it's clearly not the truth. And even though that's not about crime, although there's crime in the true story of that, I know that there are a number of books that are sold as true crime that are exaggerations, that are not true at all. I tend to distrust retired detectives who write about their part in murder investigations. I tend to distrust them for a number of reasons, but partly because I never talk about the cases I've been involved in because I signed confidentiality agreements. It would be unethical for me to talk about the realities of those investigations. So I slightly find it odd when people say this is the part that they played. And can I tell you, exclusively, there will be, I think, this year, the arrest of someone who wrote a true crime book, who claimed in that award-winning true crime book that he did something, and there's absolutely no truth in it whatsoever. And it's currently being investigated by the police in relation to fraud. So there's a whole kind of, your question was directed at Zoe because she writes fiction, but even as somebody who writes nonfiction, I'm acutely aware that there are people that claim things and write things and say things that I'm like, that's not true.
But that said, I absolutely write stories. They are not true stories. Everything is inspired. I mean, my last two books, this book and the one I wrote previously, were inspired by true stories. And yes, I had great fun creating characters that do the things I want them to do. But yes, there's always an element of truth about it, and I try not to stray too far from that.
You're both obviously storytelling, regardless of whether or not you're telling a true crime story or whether or not you're telling a fiction, you're storytelling. And I'm interested in how you kind of take the reader with you to understand someone who might feel quite different to us and who's done something terrible. How do you kind of take us to understand someone who, on paper, we might think, well, they're nothing like me?
Well, it is very difficult, and I'm going to be particularly keen to hear what Ruth says about this. One of the things I had to learn. I no longer write academic textbooks for other academics to read. I write this is regarded as a crossover book, a trade book. This is aimed at the general reader, people like yourselves. So I need to engage that reader in a very different way from how I would have written a peer review article or a textbook. Zoe's doing this because she knows full well what I mean by that. And therefore, I had to learn that as a technique. And the key thing that I've kept at the back of my mind is that I've discovered that the true crime audience is an incredibly curious audience. They want to know why. And that's often what I'm trying to write in my books. Why did this happen? Why did he, occasionally she, why did he or she behave like that? Whatever that might be. And I'm trying to explain that. I'm not trying to excuse it, but I'm trying to engage what I understand is what a true crime audience is actually seeking to find out about, which is why. And the irony is academic criminology is so rarely engaged in that question. They would prefer to discuss other things, would they not?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think it's, for me, this is one of the joys of writing crime fiction, because you have at the heart of your story a huge misdirection, don't you? You have to let the reader think you're reading one thing, and then they get partway into the story and they realise they're reading something else altogether. And for me, part of that enjoyment is creating characters that you like. And when you find out that one of them's committed a crime, you might not other them and judge them and be so harsh towards them, because you might actually find out that, yeah, this is a real person. I mean, they're not a real person because I invented them, but this person comes across like a real person, like many people I know. And now I find out they've done something, terrible. And I hope that on that journey, I've got you to like them. So that's the fun bit for me. Obviously, I do have villains. There is a villain in this story, and there's a villain in my last but one story. Perhaps The Day I Lost You is the book I wrote in between the two. And I think with that one, that's where I've addressed what you've just asked the most, really. I've tried to get my reader to see that, we're all humans, and that one of these people, or perhaps even more than one of them, has made a terrible, terrible mistake that's impacted somebody's life. But I hope that you like them all. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But I think that's the joy of writing crime fiction, which is that you can... Do I like the villains? I'm not going to answer that. I'm going to no comment that one, because I'm hoping that some people here who haven't yet read my books are going to do so. And if I answer that question, I might be giving away something about the story. So I better not. But I may or may not like my villains in all of my stories.
I'm interested in how readers react to your books and what they say to you about them. And I'm wondering if you've ever had any kind of complaints or interesting feedback about how you've portrayed a villainous character. Whether or not readers always respond to them well, or whether or not they take umbrage with how you put things across.
Well, because my work is nonfiction, often I'll get people who will disagree with the argument that I will make. They will say, oh no, I still think this person is actually the victim of a miscarriage of justice, when I don't think that. But that's not what the issue I've been kind of teasing out, Zoe, at the moment. I do a lot of public events, and obviously I am genuinely a professor of criminology. And a young woman came up to me at one of the public events and loves my work, but my tour manager said, would you like a photograph with Professor Wilson? And she did. And so I got up from the table and came round to the front of the table so that she could have a photograph taken. And then that's when it became weird, because she started to fuss in her handbag, put on makeup, brushed her hair, put perfume on, and then came up to me to have her photograph taken and draped herself on my shoulder as if I was James Bond and she was a Bond girl. And she whispered in my ear, I think of you as my murder daddy. And that's what I'm writing about at the minute. My next book is going to be called Murder Daddy, Adventures in True Crime. And so what's actually started to intrigue me is, what did that mean? What is it about true crime as a genre that becomes so all-encompassing? And if I combine that with the fact that audiences come and want to talk about this subject, I don't necessarily think, I think that was creepy, but I think what she was doing was responding to the fact that so often true crime is about being able to identify who the bad person is and get justice. And actually, it's reassuring. And it's reassuring at a time when the world isn't particularly reassuring. It's reassuring at the time when there are multiple crises in our world, these polycrises that we're trying to deal with. And I wonder to what extent that kind of... My tour manager said it sounded like a character on an OnlyFans page. And he started to work out the services that Murder Daddy would offer. And can I just assure you, I have not got an OnlyFans page. Somebody may have an OnlyFans page with Murder Daddy, but I do not. But I am intrigued by that. That's the question. Not so much you got this wrong, but more, what is it about this genre that, because it's a growth genre, it is
It really is.
It
And I
really
think if
is.
Baby Reindeer is anything to go by, Murder Daddy's going to be a huge success, isn't it? You might be setting yourself up a little bit as well. But no, it is. It's and in answer to your question, I've never had anybody come up to me and pull anything out of a handbag, or I thought you were going to say a gun then, actually. I was getting really... Did anyone else think that?
I had a man come up. So given that I mentioned a woman there, I had a man come up. And I mean, again, this is true. And he had got a tattoo of me, and he dropped his trousers to show me. I have some really interesting people.
Well, going back to your question, let's not go any more down that road. Going back to your question, I haven't had anybody have a go at me for any of my villainous characters or any of my characters, but I have been very surprised sometimes when reading reviews where people are saying, oh, no, I didn't like that character. And I thought they were all right. I quite liked them. So it's interesting, actually, because I can see how people can be perhaps more judgmental than other people. Some people really like, oh God, she was boring, she was getting on my nerves or something. I think that's the worst I hear in reviews. I sort of think to myself, but then again, the girl on the train, I mean, loads of people were saying how awful Rachel was, and I quite liked her. So I think I can say as well, with probably the majority of the people I've represented in court, I quite like them. Even people who had done some terrible things, I quite liked them. So, but not villains exactly.
The key thing is, obviously, everybody always tells, if you're an author, you immediately say to another author, never read your reviews, whether they're good or bad. But can I just say, the most scathing reviews I've ever had were from fellow academics in peer review processes. You know, academics aren't particularly kind to one another, are they? We like to say the academy.
Do they put their names, or are they anonymized?
They're usually anonymized, because the peer review process is an anonymized, supposed gold standard process. But academics aren't particularly supportive, are they?
No, absolutely not. No,
I'm competitive.
I'm recovering myself from some bad feedback that I got on Friday about a paper I've just written. So this is therapeutic for me.
What did they say?
No one's going to have a
share what they said, because academics can be absolutely the most scathing group of professionals imaginable, can't they?
Well, they can. But anyway, obviously, one thing that we've touched on briefly, but that I think we have to mention in a discussion like this is the ethics of writing about crime. And obviously, your novel was based on a real case, Ruth. Inspired by, not based on. How do you decide where to fictionalize more and where to fictionalize less? Obviously, you're taking a case as inspiration. It's not about that case. But how do you kind of manage that process in your own mind?
You go.
Well, you have to be very careful. These are real people, and therefore I tend to only mention a real person if what I'm going to say is already in the public domain. So it's not me that's giving you access to this information. It's already in the public domain. If it isn't in the public domain, I will always send that person what I've written prior to the book being going through the editing process. So I don't want anybody to be surprised by what's in the book. You know, I don't know if you've read, you're a bright audience, and I don't know if you've read Blake Morrison's new book called The A to Z of Life Writing. But in that book, which is just published, he says the difference between true crime wank and something that's worthwhile is that you're offering to the reader something above description. And that's also something I've got at the back of my mind about ethics. I will never describe a case that, as I've said, a case that I've worked on, but I can use the sorts of things I do in live cases to inform what I'm going to say. And I certainly would never just simply use a story as a kind of show me the blood spatter, true crime wank, as Blake Morrison described it.
Sure. And I mean, in your book, the one that I've got on my knee, the History of Murder book, the amount of references is, incredible. It's incredibly well referenced, factually.
Don't make them
so
get put off by it.
Not in an academic sense, but it does mean that if there are threads in there that people want to follow, that they can. Yeah. That's the PI in you, you see. You're the private investigator. You're allowing us all into that world. You, Ruth, what do you think?
Sorry, I've lost the track of the question.
It was about the... I've lost the track of the question as well.
Ethics.
It was about the ethics.
Yes, I have to be careful too. I mean, I'm a lawyer, so it's in my professional training and in my blood to be very careful when I write about what I say. And of course, if I was going to base any of my books on a case that I'd actually dealt with, I'd have to I'd have to disguise it very, very carefully. This one is not my case, but I did talk at length to the lawyer that lawyer that dealt with the case that inspired this book. And we had quite a long discussion about how I was going to present it, because the person who is at the heart of the miscarriage of justice this story is inspired by, and it's been in the news this last week, actually, I can say, is going to probably want to put pen to paper themselves and come up with their own true factual story. So I needed to make sure that there were enough differences, but equally she was very, very pleased to help me with my research, because she wanted me to talk about the post-conviction shit show, as she put it, because it really is.
But I mean, there's also a role, I think, for publishers.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I've mentioned the SALT path. The SALT path wasn't fact-checked. So there has to be a role for the publisher there as well. And, credit to Sphere, who I've always written my crossover books with. You will know that one of my books was called A Plot to Kill, about the murder of Peter Farker in Maid's Morton. That book has been temporarily withdrawn from sale because Ben Field, who was convicted of the murder of Peter Farker, that conviction got quashed. And so my publisher immediately said, given that legal situation, we best withdraw the book at the moment. So there's roles for publishers here. There's a sense in which it's our responsibility.
Yeah.
Whereas in fact, I think more publishers should be accepting the part that they have to play in relation to fact checking and making sure that lines aren't crossed.
But I think it's also interesting, the power of fiction. I mean, if you think about the power of the representation that we saw on TV, I can't remember which channel it was, about the post office scandal, the drama.
It was great.
Yeah.
ITV.
I mean, that was so powerful. And yet we'd all watch that story in the news. We'd all
taken no notice
whatsoever.
notice.
And then when we saw
until
the drama, it had such an effect on us.
Mr. Bates v. the Post Office.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Okay, we're coming towards the end of our time. I'm conscious that some of our audience might be authors themselves or aspiring authors. If
they're asleep.
If you were to give people 3 tips to get started writing about crime, what would they be?
Ruth Mancini.
About starting writing generally, I would say just read as much as possible and just write something, just get anything down on paper, because it's often not until you go back and look at it again at another time that you realise, actually, this isn't half bad. I think we can be our own worst critics. And I know, because I'm very critical of myself, and I need to learn to write faster and stop going back over and saying, is that good enough? I would say just get it out, get it down on paper, read as much as you possibly can in the genre you want to write in. So if you want to read crime, read all the crime books. So obviously crime is a huge genre. So in one you might want to write cozy crime, you might want to write true crime, you might want to write legal thrillers, as I do. You might want to write a psychological thriller. just read I mean, it's great research, it's great fun. Just read as much as you can and watch. I would say, I write very televisually because I'm a big TV watcher. I watch tons of true crime. In fact, me and David haven't got round to swapping our favourite shows yet, but I've been wading through a really good series on the Prime Crime and Investigation channel at the moment. It's called, some of these titles make me cringe because it makes me feel really sort of like unsympathetic and uncaring to be watching something called that, but it's called Accident, Suicide, Murder. And it's one of those ones, it hasn't
Bring
got...
the tone down then, Ruth.
But it's many of them are American ones, but some of them are British. And the police work is actually very good in some of the ones I've watched so far. I would say it's a good one to watch. So there we are. You start there. But otherwise, Netflix has got tons. I would just say watch in the crime genre. Watch dramas. Watch true crime. Watch what interests you, and then you'll know what you want to write, because you need to write what you're interested in and what you read.
It's very interesting though, because true crime is now influenced by crime drama, and crime drama is now influenced by true crime. So don't fall for 24 hours in police custody.
Although that's quite good.
That's scripted. It is good, but people imagine it really is a fly on the wall documentary. It's not. It's scripted. People are asked to say lines again. Certain detectives are chosen because they can deliver the line better. So all of that comes from crime drama. But it's interesting how crime drama now tries to present itself like 24 hours in police custody, as if these are ordinary people, as opposed to that genre of detective, you know, who was a gambling addict or alcoholic or divorced 15 times. So it's interesting how there's a kind of crossover between genres and how they mutually influence each other. My advice, if you want to start writing about crime, is write about things that you know about. Now, there will be moments in everybody's past where they will have known someone, or when they themselves were very close to, or did something illegal, but they didn't get caught. Everybody, as a teenager in my generation, would shoplift. You know, they would kind of nick sweeties or whatever it was. You know, it's nice to start there. It's nice to start thinking about something that's very personal to you. Did you nick sweeties from Woolworths, Zoe, growing up?
Crikey.
Don't answer that.
Maybe.
No comment.
Well, I think that brings us nicely to the end of the talk, and we're going to now carry on with some of your questions.
So
from
that's
the audience.
a yes.
That was very well.
No, just because people say no comment, it doesn't mean they're guilty. It just might be wise advice.
Yeah, do we have any questions from the audience? We've got some roving mics, so.
I've heard women are particularly interested in true crime, and I just wondered if the panel had a view on why that was.
Well, I've usually, so the first thing is that the true crime audience is much younger than people imagine. I've discovered from even the recent tour I've just finished, where I spoke to something like 3,000 people over the course of 8 days, they would be Gen Zs and millennials. So you cannot presume, firstly, that the true crime audience is the stereotype that we have about who likes true crime. However, it would be 3 out of 5 people would be female as opposed to male. And there's no getting away from that. And I've always relied on evolutionary psychology. Tell me if you disagree, please, Zoe. Because, you know, I think it's an evolutionary adaptation strategy. So often women have had to manage the violence of men. Therefore, why wouldn't you want to know the circumstances in which you were likely to encounter someone that was going to be violent towards you? Men, even though more men than women are attacked, you know, there's more murder of men than there are of women, although 2 women a week lose their lives to their partners or ex-partners, but men tend to think they are not going to be the victims of violent crime. whereas women have a greater fear of being the victims of violent crime. And I think that explains as an evolutionary adaptation strategy why there might be more women.
So we're just trying to prepare ourselves, is that what you're saying?
And avoid.
Prepare and avoid, yeah.
I think also you tend to find that the predominant, at university, for example, the predominant psychology student demographic is female. And I think the same is true in criminology. Yeah, so it's interesting. That does seem to be something that women are interested in, psychology and also in crime. Okay, I'm just going to repeat the question for the live audience, which was about cyber crime and what you see as being the main challenges in cybercrime. Is that right? Sorry, the microphone didn't quite pick it up.
Well, it's not really my world. I tend to deal with crimes of violence, but the key thing would be I'm just acutely aware of AI and the challenges that is creating in relation to AI-generated images of children, which are then traded as a form of sexual abuse. And I'm acutely aware that that's really unhealthy. I only hope that AI will also help us detect. I mean, I see everybody gets rightly worried about AI, but I wonder to what extent it could also be harnessed to prevent. And I'm sorry, I just don't know enough about that area to be able to answer your question.
I think it is. It's a real challenge at the moment, isn't it, for the National Crime Agency and for police forces across the world. I think, I mean, certainly people who've been victims of, hopefully nobody here, or have been almost fallen victim to scams. They're becoming so much more sophisticated. You probably know a lot more about this, Zoe, than I perhaps do, because I don't also, it's not my area of interest. And so these days, I tend to deal with people crimes too, rather than financial crimes. But I know from what I've read that it is a real challenge, isn't it?
Sorry, yes. I think one of the things about cybercrime is that a lot of it still relies on human behaviour. So there is often still the need to kind of engineer a situation where, if you think about even a phishing scam or something like that, you're still relying on deceiving someone to a degree. So at the moment, there's still a human element in this. And I think that's where it gets quite interesting, because you're still looking at the dynamics of what goes on between people psychologically. When it all gets into the hands of AI, heaven only knows, you know, because at that point, maybe it's not so much about the individual people and deceptive behaviours between them, but yeah.
Can it be harnessed as a prevention? In your view, this is your area.
I think potentially. I think there is a potential future for that, but I think at the moment we're still in the stages, and I'm thankful we're still in the stages, and human deception. And I think while we're still there, that's probably a good to the good. Sorry, one other thing, there is a lot of victim blaming in cybercrime. Yeah. We tend to blame the person that clicks on the phishing link as if it's a problem with them, when quite often it isn't a problem with them, you know. Next question.
Hi, over here. I sense there's an increasing interest, this is a scientific question actually, in multi-generational genetic studies and association with what David calls crime, and one knows about the case definitions and so on, that there might actually be some statistically interesting things about generations and criminal activity. I just wonder how you could answer how this is going to play out in real life, but perhaps more interestingly for today, how might that play out in fiction?
I genuinely believe that we are biological beings. We're hearts and we're minds, and and we inherit from our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents. And I certainly am very interested in intergenerational trauma and how people share how they've coped with loss or difficulties in their lives, and how their children adopt the same strategies. So I'm acutely aware that there is this issue about genetics that is always one that crops up. But equally, I usually say, if you ignore the social constructionism, see, I slip back into it. If you ignore the social constructionism about how I started by defining crime, I do genuinely believe that we are neither nature nor nurture, but a messy combination of the two that's unique to that individual. And that uniqueness, I think, Ruth, is the area in which the fiction author comes into their own, does it not?
Yeah, no, that's right. I would absolutely agree with that. And there's also the sort of situational, so you've got nature and nurture, but you've also got, you know, a lot of crimes are opportunistic and they happen because of something. So even looking for somewhere to burgle, but actually they might just be walking past a place and see, oh, that window's slightly open. Oh, let's go and give it a try. And it tends to normally work much more like that, I think, doesn't it? Would you agree?
And most burglars live very close to the houses that they're burgling. They don't travel a great distance. They're usually very geographically stable within the neighborhood in which they're burglaring. So it's, you know, there's a whole, that go back to that kind of point, you know, that, you know, the site of murder in this country is a residential dwelling.
Yeah. Yeah,
sure. Two questions for Ruth. Do you make copious notes before you start a book, or is it all in there?
I make absolutely copious notes.
And for a book where you're not drawing on experience, do you know the end before you start?
Yes, I'm a plotter. Most criminal authors, most authors, I think, they say tend to fall into one of two categories. You're either a plotter or a pantser, and somebody's called a pantser because they write by the seat of their pants. So they just start writing and off they go. And there are some very, very well-known and influential and successful authors who write like that. And in fact, I think Stephen King frowns on plotters like me and says, you know, you should just write it and see what happens and let it come organically. And that's great. But I like to know what my ending is going to be, so that I can have it as the middle of my onion and then have the layers wrapped around it. And then I know at the first part of the book where I've got to misdirect, where I've got to mislead you. And I think, you know, for me, I can tell with for Gone Girl, for instance. I think that's one of the best crime books I've ever read. But if you saw me on the sofa with my glass of wine watching my crime and investigation channel and then looked at my emails the next morning, how many I'd sent to myself I'm always pausing and like, investigator says they rely on human nature more than forensics because people will start talking. What did he mean by that? Look into that. And so I've got like a sort of a whole email chain to myself in the morning, and I get up and I go to start writing and I think, oh God, I've got all this to go through before I can even start. But yeah, I find huge nuggets of really, really useful information during my research, and I just love, I get light bulb moments when I'm going for a walk where I think, oh yeah, that will work perfectly. And I just love that idea of having got the whole structure in place and then go for it.
One final question.
Well, first, I did used to steal sweets. There we go.
Sorry?
I did used to steal sweets. No, it follows on exactly from what you've just been saying. So I listened to Richard Osman recently talking about his books, saying he had almost an algorithm for, you know, misdirection here and then leave them hanging at the end of chapter 2, etc. Do you kind of do that all the way through similarly?
Yes, I do. And when I say I plot it meticulously, it's not all, as I go, I know what the next 3 or 4 chapters are going to look like, because I don't want to spend too much time sort of going, you know, you're driving on a journey, you're going along this journey, and I like to have a roadmap, and I think probably most authors have a roadmap where they know where you're going to get to at the end of it. But I want to make sure that I'm not sort of writing lots of superfluous chapters where they're going to take me off in a direction that actually isn't going to contribute to the story, because I want every want every chapter to work for me. I want every chapter to have a purpose. I want you to get to the end of the book and say, oh, right, that's why so-and-so, and that's why that character said that, and all the little clues that I've laid along the way, you go, oh, wow. And I think with Gone Girl, when you found out that it was her, she'd done it, and it was because he'd been having the affair, you go back and you're looking at all the clues, and of course it was... Yeah. And you do, and even I've looked at it, and it's like even the very first chapter, he says, "I've been seen," and you don't know what he's referring to at the time, but later on you realise, oh, it was. He's talking about the fact that he was kissing his girlfriend and his wife has seen him. And I've just spoiled the story. Have you not read that yet? I'm so sorry. Look, it was published in 2012. I'm really sorry, but anyone who hasn't read it yet, and you've probably seen the film as well, which was also very good. I think Gillian Flynn wrote the screenplay. So yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Can I just say, I was given a great piece of information 2 weeks ago. I was in Nairn, where there was a dreadful shooting of a man called Alistair Wilson, and someone in Nairn said, Ruth, small towns have big mouths. And I think that is such a good title for a fiction novel.
Small towns have big mouths. That is so interesting, because this goes back to what I was saying, this true crime show I was watching, where the investigator said, we rely more on human nature than forensics. And I thought, what do you mean? But what he was talking about was exactly that, small towns, word getting around, and then somebody knowing something that is pretty bad and thinking, I can't live with this, I'm going to go and talk to the police. Small towns. And also great oat cakes, because Nairn's, their cheese oat cakes are wonderful, aren't they?
Oat cakes and fiction titles of books.
Small towns, great oat cakes. No, that's not right, is it?
Thank you so much to both of our authors. Just a reminder that these fine books will be being signed. So if you do have any further questions, you can buy a copy of the book, get it signed by our wonderful authors, and ask a further question at that stage. So please can we give a big round of applause to Ruth and David.